Okay, so I'll introduce the panelists. First to my left is David Brennan. He's the Director of Telehealth Initiatives at MedStar Institute for Innovation. Next to David is Elizabeth, or Liz Price, and she's the Senior Director for Community Practice, Best Practices, and Care Gaps at Geisinger Health System. And remote, using our teletechnologies, is Dr. Andrew Watson, who's the Medical Director for the Center for Connected Medicine and the CMIO for International and Commercial Services at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And I'm Rob Kolodner. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for VitalNet. We look forward to having a wonderful session with you today. What we're going to do is start, one other thing that I wanted to let you know about. If you go to the mobile app for the session, there's a place where you can ask questions. And that's actually live through the whole session. So as we're talking and as you have questions, feel free to start entering those, because we want to allow time at the end for your questions. And you don't have to wait and type them in furiously. Once we open the app, it's actually opened the whole time. We're going to start by having a few minutes of introduction by each of the panelists, talking about what they're doing in the connected health space today. And from there, we'll start in our discussion. So, David.
Great. Thank you. Again, thanks for coming out. We really encourage participation. I think yesterday there was the morning session that Andrew was on was really dynamic and interactive with the audience, so please submit questions. When we had a planning call for this, I sort of was honored but also humbled to be on a panel with Geisinger of UPMC, who I think admittedly are doing some things that have national, if not world renowned, for connected, continuous care, coordinated care. For those of you who don't know MedStar, well, for those of you who do know MedStar, we've been in the news lately. I'm not sure how many of you know that. If you haven't been following, we had a pretty vicious computer issue that I don't think I can officially comment on, sort of directing you to our public press statements, but really talks about the fragility of the system we live in. I'm pulling up stats on our system. We are 10 hospital system. We have 3,100 beds. I always have to remind myself of exactly how large we are. We're the largest provider of care in the Baltimore, D.C. region. 3 hospitals in Washington, D.C., 7 in Maryland, primarily located in urban areas. We have 1 hospital in Leonardtown, which maybe 5 or 6 years ago was rural, but for those in Maryland, it's rapidly becoming kind of sub-rural or suburban. 250 outpatient locations. We have the big box hospitals. We have big box ambulatory centers, 13 prompt care locations, and really a growing network of ambulatory sites. We have 6,000 physicians, 1,700, maybe close to 2,000 now full employees. So we're large systems. You can imagine, even in this era of connected health, when your computer systems go offline, it's sort of scary when you have 3,100 beds and you're charting on paper, but that's what MedStar had to do. But this isn't about last week. This is about what we're doing overall. As a system, admittedly, especially compared to Geisinger and UPMC, our efforts in connected health are fairly young. I describe them as broad and getting broad, but shallow, admittedly, quite shallow. We're doing things in the traditional telemedicine, teleconsult space. We have as I described, we've gotten really, really good at doing pilots. And I think as we talk about challenges, I'll come back to that theme over and over. Pilots are great. They gain acceptance. They gain champions. They gain mind share, but they're also fraught with peril, because they can go away just as fast as they started, which is challenging. So some of the things that we're doing, teleconsult space, telestroke, doing teleethics consults, doing some work in cardiology, and for the most part, these are between our MedStar-owned facilities. So we'll talk about that on one side. More exciting for me, and really speaking to the care transformation, we heard Dr. Tuckson talk about, and Dr. Gibbons in the morning. MedStar's living in this world where we're in Maryland, so we have global payment. We have still primarily fee-for-service, but between global payment, we have an at-risk approach that now, I can't remember the statistic, it's probably getting near 50% of our revenue comes from some form of at-risk model. So we're a large Medicaid managed care plan. We have an employee health care plan that I think common sense would dictate likely may become a public health offering, much like UPMC has done, but on a significantly smaller scale. So looking across all of that, MedStar has to start taking approaches that are more connected and seamless. We've been exploring opportunities in the connected care direct-to-consumer space. We heard about Carolina's yesterday. We're also using American Well. We have a very small, slow rollout direct to employees for now, looking at American Well as an offering for episodic low acuity visits, and that the vision there is to route those calls to our prompt care physicians, urgent care docs. So, as a 14th walk-up clinic, essentially, it now becomes a virtual walk-up clinic. Over time, we'll roll that out as a broader offering and then use that platform for other things. We're looking at rolling out a pilot project with our Diabetes Control Center, so patients who are enrolled in diabetes pathway admitted from any of our primary care or EDs would have access to some of those virtual care services. We're also doing some things that were in the press, partnerships with sort of disruptive players in the space, Uber for getting patients to our front door, Igbo for doing phlebotomy at home. We were the first folks in the region to put our doctors on ZocDoc, so we're trying to find ways to both bring patients in and then keep them connected, not just into our system, but into our physicians and into our care pathways over time. So I think during the Q&A, I'll be able to come back and speak to a lot of the other things we're doing. But I think as we look to systems like the Geisingers and the UPMCs and many others, great work, we're really trying to learn the approaches that work and where we have room to improve and change.
Okay, great.
Liz?
Good morning, everyone. So, as Rob indicated, I'm Liz Price from the Geisinger Health System, and I'd like to talk a little bit today about a few concepts. The first is where we are from a telehealth standpoint. This is relatively new space for me. I've been at Geisinger well over 20 years, involved in IT, our EHR implementation since 1996. But I moved into operations and picked up some other responsibilities. So when Rob introduced me, I primarily work in our primary care service area, which is about 50 primary care sites. And I also have accountability for a program called Care Gaps. So mining data within our EHR, understanding gaps in care across the continuum for patients and pulling those patients into care. But most recently, actually within the last 3 months, I accepted a position in our new Center for Telehealth, which was just launched about 3 months ago. And it's really the first time since 1996 when we started on this journey that we have leadership endorsement to move forward with telehealth. And so I'm going to back up a little bit. In 1996 is when we started to dabble in telemedicine. And this is when we did store and forward for radiology. It has since evolved, and in 2011 is when we really started to launch our consultative services for primary care patients who could see specialists. And we spent quite a few years making sure that we had our top 20 specialists. We're about 20 different specialties live on the outpatient consults. And then in the last year or so, started to reach out to other healthcare organizations and provide contracted services. So we do both internally and externally consultative services. In addition, within the last 3 years, we have done a pilot for e-visits using our EHR technology. And we did that for about 12 months. We did not charge patients. We wanted to understand the experience from a patient's point of view. And surprisingly, in rural Pennsylvania, we had quite a few takers who were very interested in that technology. Now, I'll also mention that we're very active on our patient portal, which is we use Epic. So it's the MyChart application, which we have branded My Geisinger. And patients can receive medical advice today for free. And so that was part of a culture change that we went through our pilot with our e-visit model. We decided not to go down that road because the technology at the time was not to the level where we felt it needed to be. And so there were some changes going on at our executive level. We recently acquired a new CEO last May, Dr. David Feinberg from UCLA, and he has really embraced telemedicine and the technology surrounding that. So based on that, the Center for Telehealth is born. It has been born about 3 months ago, and as a result of that, we recently, as of last week, signed a contract with Doctor On Demand to help provide e-visit on-demand services, and we plan to launch by end of June of this year. It's not clear to me at this point what we plan to do as an organization. I guess we just need to figure it out for those services that where we really want to go in the e-visit space would be for follow-up visits. So a patient is seen for depression, they're on medication, they're stable, they need to come back in 3 months. We want to be able to offer our patients the ability to do that type of visit through e-visit technology. In addition, I'll just mention that our Center for Telehealth is organized in this particular way. We have a medical director and we have 2 operational leads. My counterpart is responsible for fixed services. So she has responsibility for our EICU, which is about 6 years old. She has accountability for the consultative services, more bricks and mortar. And I have accountability for the remote services, so remote patient monitoring and e-visits. So I am really very young in my role, and I look to some feedback today in the audience, and I hope to learn from you as you learn from me. Thank you.
Liz. And now we'll go to Andrew Watson remotely. And by the way, I see that some questions have started to be entered. That's very good, and continue them. And remember, you can upvote some of the questions there if you want to basically add your I want to know this to it. So now, Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. And I'm looking into a dark room, so it's almost like looking at the superdelegates in the election and trying to figure it out. I've got to stay out of the politics. I work at UPMC. I'm an actively practicing surgeon there, but about 80% of my time is spent on the corporate side. And UPMC, we have a tremendous respect for both Geisinger and MedStar. And we are an integrated system like Geisinger in Pennsylvania. We are the second largest one in the United States and have an insurance company that covers almost 3 million lives. And we have a delivery system with 22 hospitals and approximately 3,700 physicians. And so for us, we view telemedicine, telehealth, e-health, connected medicine, whatever the latest vernacular is, but really telemedicine as this, it's the natural evolution of healthcare in the digital world. It's just how the society has evolved with the onset of broadband, these incredible new smart endpoints that we have, and now with the consumer electronics market taking us in directions that we never anticipated. And I started my journey personally in telemedicine back in 2006, doing colorectal surgery consults. And because, as I said yesterday, you can't do a rectal examination through telemedicine, so patients flock to telemedicine and to save themselves. And we started doing pre-operative visits, post-operative visits, tele-rounding, and really it became just the natural flow of my clinic. And today, and when I have clinic on Thursday, sometimes you don't even know when you go in the room, is it a patient or a computer? And that's one of the desired endpoints of telehealth or telemedicine, is that it's blended, it's a seamless part of our practices. As a priority for UPMC, there are 3 different ways you look at telehealth in general, some of the challenges and opportunities that we have. If you look at it from a delivery system, and the delivery systems are using this as a tool for access, it's a tool for getting new patients, it's a tool for avoiding travel, which does have your satisfaction surveys, and it's a way of reaching out in ways that we never even envisioned. And so we do rural clinics across a wide variety of service lines. It's maternal fetal medicine, it's a very large stroke network, it's subspecialist care. You know, radiology, teleradiology are just the same, telepathology, ophthalmology. We have a consumer-facing dermatology offering that we built internally. So for us, it's just the natural evolution of healthcare. And trying to blend it into your clinics. There's a challenge to that, which I'll get to in just a bit. On the payer side, it's very different because the payer side is really, as I work for both the insurance side of UPMC and the delivery side of UPMC. And so my job on the insurance side is to put myself out of a job on the delivery side if things go as planned. So it's a little bit schizophrenic there. The payer side is really about consumerism. It's patient portals, companies like American Well, it's remote monitoring. We're in an implementation with a company called Vivify. It's a whole way of actually how do you reach out to consumers in new ways. It's preventative care, long-term care, care management, and the like. And then if you look at the structure of UPMC and Geisinger, we call ourselves an IDFS, or an integrated delivery finance system. And how do you blend the two sides together that have durability and meaning? How do you blend the delivery telehealth or telemedicine along with the insurance side or the preventative side of telemedicine or the care coordination side? And there's a challenge to that and an art to that. So if you take a half step back and say, well, how do you really get into telemedicine and what are some of the challenges that we face? Without a doubt, the technology is a challenge right now. It's not so much an issue of broadband. It's not widely known, but AT&T has lit up a lot of Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania with non-LTE 4G. Verizon's following. The VTOP grant also gave us a lot of middle mile fiber. So access to consumers is less of a challenge really these days. And what we're seeing is really more on the industry side of telemedicine. And I'm just speaking to you as someone that is employed by UPMC. The technologies behind live video are quite different than store and forward, and are very different from patient portals like American Well, and then remote monitoring companies such as Vivify. And so you see a spread of the technology. And from a consumer standpoint, and UPMC as a consumer, you have to integrate these very carefully. And they have to feed one another. And you have implementation challenges within your electronic health records. We use Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, Variant, dbMotion. We use an array. And so you have to feed these through your message router. And another big challenge that we've seen with telehealth or telemedicine is the financial modeling behind this, is that this is not, at times, inexpensive. If you're looking at video-based installations, if you're looking at getting your IT systems to integrate with these various platforms, there's an expense to this. And people view this in ROI models as a shared service or a central service funding model, as an opportunity cost. And it's critical that your leadership recognize these models and also support one of them. And certainly we're seeing in the remote monitoring space the need for a very large filter or call center. It's something that it's very hard to build into the ROI model because it drives your PM costs up. And then the last major challenge that we see in the opportunities is the cultural change. I'm a physician. I don't know how many physicians are in the room, but it is quite remarkable to look back on the history of physicians. And I love being a physician, but we did say no to hand washing, DNA, antibiotics, transplantations, laparoscopy, and EHRs. And so it's telemedicine. These changes are very hard for the physician community. And that's not said in a pejorative fashion. That's just the natural history of our profession over 100 years. And this one's very hard because you're separating the doctor and the patient for the first time ever. I mean, you're going back to what Hippocrates created in essence. And so the cultural change behind telehealth is quite large. But on the good side of this is the fact that now that the accountability, which is equivalent to risk, is rising, there's more pressure on the systems to change in terms of financial modeling, really looking at how we reach out to the patients, and for physicians to look at things in new ways. I'm sure there's many nurses in the room. They've always been out ahead of physicians in terms of cultural change, and I always admire what they do. And so for UPMC right now, we view telemedicine as a high strategic priority in a variety of ways. We're leaning very heavily into patient portals and remote monitoring right now. And I'm also on the board of the American Telemedicine Association. I know Reed was there this morning. And this is a fabulous organization. We have our spring meeting coming up in May, and I hope that many of you folks can make it as well. And one of the big things the ATA is looking at, along with the policies and the procedures, the standards and the guidelines, which are critical for industry guidance, is also we're starting to look at value. And for you, PMC, like, what is the value of telehealth? It's what do we get from this investment? And that's one of perhaps the greatest challenges. It's no different than saying what's the value of robotic surgery or laparoscopic surgery or of a new drug-eluting stent or a new care plan. It's what do we get from this and why do we do it? That includes patient safety, includes quality outcomes, but it also includes the unit cost and the rate of utilization. And so the value equation is very important to watch and track as you try to grow and expand telemedicine in your organization. We've been doing telemedicine since around 2000. We're still growing and evolving. We have a wide variety of service lines across many consult centers. We have our own homegrown patient portal. We're transforming into a commercialized version of that, adding on remote monitoring, looking at surgical telemetry, and building EICU in a sequential fashion, mostly internationally right now, but looking at domestic installations as well. So it's a very exciting future, and happy to take any questions. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Let me start to see if there are any comments that the panelists have for one another, because what is striking is that even on the panelists, what I'm hearing is organizations that are at different stages of the process of moving forward. Maybe we can...
Yeah, certainly. I would echo everything Andrew says. I think what jumped out at me, leadership, resources, and cultural change are huge. I was spoke at a conference. It was a diabetic limb salvage conference of all places, and they said, "Oh, could you talk about?" The title was "Telemedicine: Will it ever get beyond the hype?" All right, so thank you for priming the pump. So I had one slide, and I just said yes, and I got up to walk away. But the point I made was, I think telemedicine is going to get beyond the hype and we've heard it before, when we stop calling it telemedicine, when telemedicine, connected care, and e-health, m-health, whatever you want to call it, when it becomes part of people's view of this is an asset or a way in which we're going to transform care and change the way we deliver care. Stop calling it something. If it needs a name, absolutely, because it needs a line in a budget. But the reality is all of our systems are undergoing care transformation. Andrew mentioned the word value a number of times, and I say this all the time to people, any project, you have to define what your value is going to be. There are plenty of places where fee-for-service, it's still here. It may be dead, but it's still here, and Medicare is never going to change, right? Medicare is going to go away before it changes, or at least go away for fee-for-service for the little lines we're trying to get approved. I think if you can find value around an HCAP score or patient access metric, ROI is always in the eye of the person who's asking it, right? So part of what we do all the time, trying to build championships, I'm like a salesman, essentially. I mean, I talk to vendors all the time. I say, look, I feel your pain. I'm meeting with the same people you're meeting, and I work with them. Right? And I'm trying to sell a concept. And a lot of it is trying to find I say all the time, what needle do you want to move? Is it patient retention? Is it, for everybody was focused, I guess still are, but readmissions reduction. So if I can reduce readmissions, now I have your attention. If I can improve patient satisfaction, I have your attention. If I can create some care efficiency in the way that you monitor your patients, that's another point. So.
Yeah, I would just add too, in terms of challenges and opportunities, one of the things at Geisinger that we're very much focused on, and again, it's because of our CEO and his mindset and really changing our culture, but it feeds into everything we do and how we behave and how we treat our patients and our members. And that is really about engagement. So you can build any type of technology, put any type of technology out there, but without involving the patient or the member and getting their input into how it's going to work, you can flip the switch and it could be available. It's really, in my mind, about focusing more on the patient, the member, understanding what we know about that person, offering preferences. What we think might be a telemedicine visit for a patient, we might think that's the right answer, but for a patient, let's say 50 years old, female, that person may want to just come into the office and have a one-on-one one-on-one encounter with a provider. So it's really understanding our patients, knowing their preferences, offering services based on preference. And I just want to drive home that point. I don't think we do a great job. I know we don't at Geisinger. And we're really focused on patient preference and providing services that meet the needs of our patients.
Just to go quickly off of what David and Liz had said, I think it's funny that people talk about hype in telemedicine. So if you think telemedicine's hype, I want everyone to throw out their cell phones and their computers on the way out the door, bring a pen and paper up, because I can actually see the audience now, so I can see the super delegates. I can see them waving at me. Who in the audience, just raise your hand, has a cell phone and a computer with you, just out of curiosity?
The vast majority.
Has a cell phone, a computer, and a tablet with you here? Raise your hands. So I think those that call it hype should take a horse and buggy to work and remind themselves of what thy life would look like. And this is just medicine growing up in the digital world. This has nothing to do with healthcare. I don't call my phone my e-phone. I don't call my computer my e-computer. I don't have a watch yet, but it's just the way we are today. And as a result, telemedicine is here, and it's just going to become medicine. That's all it is. I was trained to do laparoscopic colectomies back in 2002, and three of us were the first to do them in Pittsburgh, and it was considered to be heresy, evil, witchcraft, experimental. I wore a grass skirt to work, and it was just surgery. I don't really talk about laparoscopy. I mean, even the most rural patients come in saying, "Doc, I heard some video surgery and I want that." And that's great. It's just surgery. And so those that call it hype, I would just, quite frankly, ignore them. There's not much you can say. I tell them to, again, get rid of their cell phones and computers and rethink that. And then the other part that I'm seeing right now is age bias. There's a baseline of people that don't want to do a certain activity. There's some people that don't like public transportation. There's some people that don't like to fly. There's some people that don't like trains. There's some people that don't like healthcare. There's some people that don't like telemedicine. There's some people that don't like EHRs and the like. But what we tend to do is to see a blip of people that don't like telemedicine and swing right to the old folks. And I'm just saying right now, I've done almost 500 consults. It's not a lot because it's enough. Older folks tend to grasp onto it more quickly than the young folks because they're the ones that have to travel. They're the ones that have to find drivers. They're the ones that feel like they're putting out a family member that have to travel. So one word of caution is this has nothing to do with age. And the consumers are all over this. Healthcare can't catch up fast enough to the consumer electronics market. I think if I'm not incorrect, most of our cell phone networks are actually built at a gigabit down. Right now, they're about 150 megabits down. It's only a matter of this marketing game of who ramps it up more quickly to get more customers. So surrounded us is this world that healthcare is trying to embrace. It's more of an internal issue than an external issue. And that perhaps is one of the greatest challenges that we have. Very exciting.
Well, in listening to all of you, one of the things that strikes me is the perspective that we all have, of course, is a point in time. And our world of healthcare is from medical centers and health systems. My father was a surgeon, and back 50 years ago, most of the care was either in the office or a house call. Andrew, when you said that telemedicine separates the physician from the doctor, the question is whether we've been doing that by centralizing our care and whether we're actually going back to the virtual house visit, house call. But the challenges that has for a healthcare delivery system is that it suddenly transforms where the care is given and what the expectation is. And that can be disruptive from the people who keep thinking of, well, I've got to keep getting bigger and bigger and centralizing more and having a larger campus and other types of things. Have you run into that, or how is that tension manifest and playing out in your institutions?
I don't think we know what the point of care is anymore. It's one of the things the ATA really is, its leadership role in telemedicine is critical. It's not why we do healthcare, but where does healthcare take place? It was never designed to be these urban centers. Healthcare was designed to be at the homes. And that's the best way for it to take place. And if you go back just, 60, 70 years, I mean, my great-grandfather, grandfather, great-uncle, and father all made house calls, and I don't know why I don't. So my reason for being in this is to make house calls again. When we talk about consumerism and engagement, it's just the natural evolution of it. I really don't think we know where healthcare takes place anymore. It's a fascinating issue to watch, but with the consumer electronics market, it's clearly going to leave the hospitals and offices, and that's okay. It was actually never really designed to be there. You still need the hospitals and offices, but it can't be the currency for healthcare.
Well, any of the tensions that you're seeing as you interact and start to move out the activities?
I think care to the home, you can't see it, but I have a slide I always do, which is black and white, doctor in the home, bring the care to the patient, and that's where healthcare started. That's where it's headed. It's ironic, Andrew said UPMC, that integrated networks, they're stealing business from themselves. I heard, when MedStar had a huge push toward ambulatory, and someone said, look, if we don't steal patients from ourselves, CVS is going to steal our patients. Yes, now maybe it's going to be the Postal Service. I think it's going to be these market disruptors that really change the way healthcare shifts. And market disruptors only have a market to disrupt because there's a consumer who demands it. So inconvenient care on a provider schedule is not how healthcare in the future is going to be. Every patient's going to be paying more for their healthcare, be it a high deductible plan or fully out-of-pocket care. If Google decides to offer a healthcare plan that's convenient, given their size, they could create a whole new mid-level provider. And as long as it has a credential and a quality metric that meets patient satisfaction, could completely upend the way that care is provided, right? We don't know this as systems. We have to sort of get there. We don't really know exactly. We have a partnership with Uber. What are we going to do with it yet? Honestly, we haven't really figured it out yet, but we would rather be talking to them than not. Urban centers, this young millennial demographic, primary care in the home, they're already doing concierge care. They'd rather have convenient care at their time and place. So in a large system, you have to get to that. But also at a large system, we're dealing with massive amounts of people with chronic conditions, comorbidities, the high utilizers. We still need to care for them. We can't, not everybody's going to want an Uber concierge doc in their home. So I think some of the things UPMC is doing with monitoring, some of the care coordination effort that Geisinger's been doing for a while, these are all models we can and should be learning from. We had two quick things around home care. So we have a medical house call program. It's run out of Washington Hospital Center. I mentioned it to a few people here. It was one of the first Independence at Home demonstration projects. So bundled payment, shared savings model. This is a fully in-the-home primary care, geriatric physicians, go to the home, care coordination, social work, nurse practitioners. Their shared savings check in a model that was bundled up with UPenn, VCU, and MedStar was over $1.5 million in shared savings for Medicare, right? And this, keep in mind, this was a home care house call program that was 100% boots on the ground, not a lick of digital intervention. So moving care into the home, even inefficiently, is more efficient than the way that we do care today, and that's sort of a sad state of affairs. But this post-discharge support, we had a project with palliative care patients. Again, high intensity, high need patients. The model was send them home with a piece of equipment rather than a stack of papers. And that piece of equipment can do video consults. You can talk to your pharmacist with a med checkup, can have an updated meds list, can push the patient education in a stimulated, patient engaging way. This was funded by Verizon Foundation. Great outcome, again, hard to scale up, but it works. These things work, we know they do. So there's massive amounts of potential. I want to make sure we come back to, because I saw there was a question about challenges, and I think from where we sit, trying to do this stuff organically and grow it, we faced a whole host of challenges, but I want to make sure we stay on the clinical topic for a second. But I want to
finish this and we'll get back to the challenges.
Thank you.
Next. Yeah.
Anything to add?
No, I'm
Okay. Okay. So
Concur.
so why don't we move to this issue, and that is, what are the challenges that you had to overcome? We have in the audience people who, some may be more advanced, but many are still looking at going from the pilot stage into the operational stage. And what are the lessons that you learned that you wish someone else had shared before you started the project?
Wow, that's a great question.
We don't have to put Liz on the spot. If somebody else wants to jump in first. All this is thing.
Can we insert political humor here, or is that inappropriate?
Up to you. You're at a distance, so the tomatoes can't hit you.
We'll see him at the ATA.
That's right.
One of the audience members said, "We'll see you at ATA, so we can get you then." So, what are the? I mean, obviously, with what you have under your belt, there are things that you learned that you said, "I wouldn't do that one again. I'd go some other way," and then you've of course corrected along the way. So, what are a few of the things that you wish you had known before you started that you can share with the audience?
So I think from my standpoint, just getting into this space for a few months is that what's been one of my biggest challenges and one of my biggest frustrations is the fact that our leadership team did not align. And so if you don't have a strong, if leadership does not align, you can't really move forward and you can't make a decision. So that has been one of my biggest challenges. Until that happened recently, we were pretty much stagnant. And I'll tell you, working at Geisinger, we are typically on the bleeding edge, and we laugh about it. We're out there from an innovative standpoint. And quite frankly, we're behind in this space. And it doesn't feel good to me to be behind the times when it comes to telehealth. And in some ways, we're advanced, but when it comes to e-visits and remote monitoring, again, we've talked about dabbling, piloting, but how do you really scale up? How do you really move forward? I think one of the other things I would mention is underestimating the ROI and really trying to figure out what the ROI is when you don't know what you don't know. And that's been one of my biggest challenges in getting leadership to buy into this. We think that e-visits will help decompress the EDs, but we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so it's been very hard and it's been challenging to get people on board to actually pay for an e-visit platform without having a solid ROI. So I would just add those pieces. I wish I had known that 3 months ago before I kind of jumped in with both feet. But it's been an interesting ride. And so I'll just throw that out there. I don't know if you have any comments.
I think what I'd echo, absolutely all of your points. The don't know what you don't know is huge. I think opportunities like this are great. Shared networking is great. Meeting the other clients of your vendors and having conversations with them without the vendor in the room is a huge opportunity. Ideally, before you sign your own contract, that's a great thing to do.
Exactly.
There's certainly in this space a shiny object syndrome, right? Everybody loves the latest and the greatest. And depending on your organization, I was going to say an unnamed organization. But I think to a certain degree, it's much easier to buy a thing than to buy people. But things only can do so much. So I sort of have on my whiteboard in the corner, and anyone who comes in, I sort of point it out to them. In my mind, anything in this space requires a combination of technical infrastructure, which is really the easy thing to buy. Somebody provides that for you. Operational resources and clinical capacity. If the three of those things align, you have some opportunities. But if you're missing one of them, things can really, really break down. Lack of clear, and then on top of that, as Andrew alluded to, is really leadership. And it's not just leadership of someone who's going to, write the check and approve the budget.
Right.
It's someone who's really going to commit to this isn't a thing we're doing or a product we're buying or a center we're building. This is a culture we're creating. There was a question submitted about physician engagement. I think it was directed toward Andrew, but all of us could say this. You can't. nurses, doctors, NPs, pharmacists, social workers, unless they're the ones who are on board and willing to do this, there's a certain carrot or stick approach you can have to incentivize people to participate. But no system's really figured out a good staffing model of, how are you generating productivity? How are you tracking engagement, motivating the providers to actually provide this care? You think about all this big push direct to consumer on demand. On demand is great, but if you put a new emergency department and the doors only open with a doctor behind it a couple hours of a day, it's not going to work.
Right.
But if you don't have a predictable volume, it's hard to staff it. So you have to jump in with 2 feet, but it's a fairly shallow pool, but it can fall off. I mixed 7 metaphors there. It's not easy. How about that?
So work on the metaphor, David. I'm chewing on it here. But that's you're building a virtual hospital here, and you're building a savage horizontal and vertical industry. And you have to, in your hearts and minds, understand that's where you're heading. And that's one of the challenges that you see. If you're going to do this, you have 2 options. You can do death by pilots, or you can sit down and figure out what this virtual hospital is going to be, this virtual world. And it's no different than what the newspapers have to deal with. We don't subscribe to newspapers, you're getting it online, and they had to figure out very quickly what a digital subscription means. And that's what healthcare has to deal with. If you do it through pilots, you can, but it's almost like a slow dental drill. It just hurts. And no one's really happy. You feel like a jilted sailor on 3 days shore leave. It doesn't work. It just doesn't end. The virtual hospital is a hard concept. And as you heard, you get this bright, shiny object syndrome, which I love it. It's just that people run from one vendor to the next. I'm leading a large remote monitoring program at UPMC. And what we realize is the technology is only 20% of it. About another 10 or 15% would be finance, and the rest is operations. I'm not talking about my cutting operations. I'm talking about how you make this thing work. And so the virtual hospital, had we sort of taken a half step back and walked back a few years, it is that concept and what you're trying to accomplish with this virtual, and in fact, I should not use hospital. It's like a virtual medical home, is what does that do for you? And that's where the leadership has to be. If you short yourself on that discussion, and saying we want to do a stroke network, or we want to do a colorectal clinic, or we want to do e-visits, you're shorting yourself with leadership. You have to understand up front, the world is virtual, the consumers are virtual, this is a collapsing global world with infrastructure. Healthcare is falling behind. We are way behind. And so I wish that we had the ability to rewind those conversations and look strategically at a graph, and we know the slope of this. And it's not linear, it's exponential. And when you think about what's going to happen, are we going to have driverless cars? Absolutely. Are we going to be logging into computers by looking at retina scanning and nodding? Absolutely. Are we going to have speech driving everything in terms of commands and transcription? Absolutely. I mean, I haven't touched a radiology film for 5 years. I don't carry a pager. My notes are done in 5 minutes with speech to text. And this is just kind of basic stuff of the consumer electronics market. So my advice really is, when you're at these leadership levels, is to have that conversation. And you need to get key influencers to the meetings that can do this. You have the subspecialty meetings, psychiatry, dermatology, radiology are great with telemedicine. Certainly the American Telemedicine Association shines as the national leader in this. Get the influencers here to see this and realize this is not some hoax, or it's not a bright, shiny object. It's the real deal. And the question is, how fast can you catch up to it? And do you try to meet it out in front? And the other part about the financial modeling is I would try to not use an ROI, but use it as an opportunity cost. It's like the price of poker. There's an ante to the game. The most expensive thing we do in life is to breathe oxygen. When our diaphragms contract, they use an enormous amount of ATP. It's not like I'm saying the cost of being alive is how much of my diaphragms used today. I'm just alive. And it's expensive to stay alive. It doesn't have to be brutally expensive to sacrifice the body, but it takes energy. Why would you buy a car? It's a terrible thing. You drive it off the lot, it's evaluated on the spot, but you have to have a car. There's an opportunity cost for what we do in life, and that's what this is. Try to stay away from the ROI modeling fully loaded. It's hard.
What I want to do is transition to the questions. There's a lot of questions that have come in from the audience, so I want to switch over to that. One observation I'd like to make, when I was with HHS, we had an advisory committee to the secretary. This is about electronic health records, and we had the CEO of Intel who was looking at all of us who were from healthcare, whether it's from the government or from private sector. And he looked at us, he said, "You guys don't get it." Because we were talking as if we were driving the market, not our customers, in that case, our patients or people who occasionally need health care. That we were talking as if we drive the market. He said, he was used to a market where the market was driving the industry and they had to keep up. And one thing to consider is, whereas in the retail world, the internet disrupted the models. We know the brick and mortar and the switch to buying online. It didn't do that to healthcare. But telemedicine is what's giving our customers the choice that break through the geographic boundaries. I don't have to go to the entity that I can drive to within the first 50 miles. And that may be having that disruptive effect on healthcare delivery in the way that the internet had on the rest of retail. And frankly, as you know, most retailers didn't see it coming, and many were running to chase to go forward. So as Andrew was saying, the opportunity cost, if you don't invest in it, it isn't a matter of return on investment, because the whole business model is going to be changing, and it could be disrupted by somebody else. If we could get the questions on the screen. Are we able to do that on one screen and have Andrew be on the other screen? I guess we replace him. We do an either or, Andrew. We'll have you come back as we go.
Not much.
The top question there, Liz, you look like you won the award there. And you can also look over on the, on the board there.
Small monitor.
Yeah, very small. So what services are you contracting out with Doctor on Demand? Did you consider providing the services internally? We did. And this was actually one of our selling points with Doctor on Demand, as other vendors provide this as well. But so what we've signed up to do with Doctor on Demand is for on-demand acute care only. This is kind of a no-brainer for us. It's acute care visits. It's going to help decompress our primary care schedules. We hope it will help with access, which is a huge issue in many of our primary care practices, as I'm sure it is for you all. And what attracted us to Doctor on Demand is that they employ physicians licensed in Pennsylvania, and they also contract with doctors licensed in Pennsylvania. We had a handful, less than 10 of our primary care providers, and we have about 300, who expressed an interest. But the first question from our primary care providers is, what am I going to get from an RVU standpoint? What is the benefit of me performing e-visits when the RVU credit is higher if I see a patient in the office? So not really interested. The providers that were interested within our network are providers that are ready to retire or want to work part-time, want to kind of ease out of their practice. So again, we couldn't stand up an e-visit program with 10 providers that wanted to dabble. And that is one of the reasons why we went with Doctor on Demand, because they will be providing those services for us until we get to a point where we have enough volume to support, and again, we don't know what we don't know, until we get enough volume where we can keep our primary care providers busy.
Okay, thank you. We have a number of questions, and only about 7 or 8 minutes left. So what I'm going to ask is that we kind of go through these fairly quickly. One of the interesting challenges is the list that I have on the app is slightly different order than the list up here. So I'm going to kind of direct them so we get everybody to have a question. Andrew, there's one about what your recommendations are for incentivizing physicians to adopt and grow more use of the telemedicine in an academic medical center setting.
just put them at risk. That people have to understand that the old model of healthcare is fee-for-service is not the best ethical or viable model. So putting them at risk in terms of contracting and also in terms of patient satisfaction scores. And it's very hard. You can get speakers up there to try to get in front of your physician groups to say how good this is, and that's of moderate value, not mild, but moderate. They're really putting them at financial risk in any way you can. In the non-employed network, that's higher. But people are coming around to this more and more. It's very, very hard.
Very good, thank you. David, next question is for you, if you want to read
Current challenges with your programs?
Yes.
It's not an easy answer. So I'm trying to make this concise, and I'm in the interim taking up too much time. I think that part of the challenge is we bootstrap a lot of this. My introduction, within MedStar's massive organizational structure, I live in the MedStar Institute for Innovation, and the catchphrase of our role within the organization is to catalyze innovation. Catalyzing is great. The problem is a lot of times in telehealth, as people have said to me, you don't have a catcher's mitt. So I can have an engaged clinician who wants to do virtual care, and I can help stand up and I can get a couple doctors going and the model will be self-sufficient. But think about an operational clinical entity, right? Who does that typically, take a primary care office. You've got some front office, back office staff. They're not equipped to be tech support. So having some organizational core that can do some of the heavy lifting is really what's important in a system. We're trying to build that. So we're kind of coming at it from this is where we're falling down. We're engaged with IT. Obviously, they're a strong partner. We try to keep them in the appropriate role of, for the most part, get out of our way. But there's certain rules clearly we have to play within. That's a big one, but I think the most is having that clinical and the operational folks who can really help sustain and take the programs on and bring it to a long-term viability.
Thank you. Liz, there's a question for you about whether all of your providers work the e-visits, and do you see that model changing with Doctors on Demand?
Yeah, so right now, none of our doctors do e-visits. We're not launching until a June timeframe. In the beginning, I would say until volume supports our docs getting involved and credentialed, it could be 6 months until we have a handful. Again, probably less than 5 to get started. We hope to grow that over time because certainly we don't want to give our business to the vendor. That's not our long-term strategy. We consider that short-term. And short-term could be 12 to 18 months. Again, we just simply don't know. But our goal would be to own e-visits, both from an on-demand acute care and then build out our follow-up care later, using only our physicians.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. Rather than taking more questions, maybe we should wrap up and have each of you spend a minute or two just kind of summarizing what people should be thinking about as they go forward and where you think you're going.
I think to sum it up for me, the biggest thing, a lot of times people, go back to how we learn to tell a story, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how. A lot of times people come to me and they've already figured out the how. And I have to kind of walk them back. And we really need to start with the why. And the what. So what are you trying to accomplish here? Is it improving access? Is it continuity of care? Is it spiraling medical costs for a certain subcomponent of a population? If we can start with the why, then get to the what do you want to achieve, then we can build out the where, the who, the how. Because a lot of times clinicians come to us with, oh, can I use American Well for such and such? In reality, all you need is a secure messaging platform to remind patients to come to an appointment. The KISS metaphor certainly applies in telehealth. You don't always need the Cadillac. A lot of times you can get away with the Yugo. Is that still is it still relevant? It's finding the right tool for the job. But to me, that all starts with really understanding what the need is.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. I'm often challenged with clinicians and administrators coming to me with the answer. This is what I need. And it's really about the translation. So it's, putting on an informatics hat and looking at, okay, what are the operational needs? What are the technical needs? What do we have in-house? We don't necessarily need to go out and buy something new. And actually at Geisinger right now, we're being challenged with IT governance. And it's been a big challenge over the last 12 months, and people are not getting what they want. It's going through a process, and governance is working. So that's another component to all of this. As you're looking at new technologies, do you even understand what your system has available today? I can tell you that my eyes have been opened in our organization, all of the duplicative software packages that are out there, and why we can't get IT to work on anything new and innovative. It's because they're maintaining multiple software packages. It has absolutely been very enlightening, to say the least, to really look at that. And I think many organizations struggle with that same concept.
Andrew?
Just keep going. This is where healthcare is headed, and I would just recommend that you get as much intelligence as you can in front of the influencers. But if you look at this room full of people that have taken time away from their jobs, their families, are paying money, or getting on planes and driving cars, the inconvenience and hassle of travel, it's remarkable the interest in this field. Whether anyone likes it or not, healthcare is going to be virtual. It's going to be mostly virtual in the next 15 or 20 years. The vast majority of it will be virtual. We're just a little bit ahead of it right now, and just hang in there and have fun with it. It is brutal. Yes, we have 950 interfaces to our message router. Yes, we use 4 or 5 EHRs. Yes, there's 4 different buckets of vendors in telehealth and telemedicine right now. But the bottom line is the patients get better, and they want this. And with that being done, it's inevitable, and keep going and try to hide from the ROI. It's just so hard. Talk about the financial model, not the ROI, and people will come on board. It just takes time.
Well, thank you to the panelists for very enlightening and exciting conversation, and thank you to the audience for coming out this morning and spending your time with us.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.